my wife's cheating exposed when she tried taking my son, divorce, custody battle, and a secret online affair. My wife, Sarah, and I have been married for 8 years, and we have a 6-year-old son named Marcus. I'm 32, she's 29, and we live in Ohio, where I work as a network administrator for a mid-sized company and earn a decent income of around $75,000. Sarah worked part-time at a dental office until about 2 years ago when she decided to stay home with Marcus. I supported her decision because childcare costs were eating up most of her paycheck, and we could manage on my income. Everything seemed normal until about 6 months ago when Sarah started acting differently. It wasn't a dramatic change, but rather little things that added up. She was always on her phone, which wasn't unusual since everyone is these days. But she would flip it face down when I walked into the room or take it with her to the bathroom. She also began staying up later, claiming she was watching Netflix or reading articles online. But when I glanced over, she would quickly switch screens. Sarah started talking about feeling like she was losing herself in motherhood and marriage, which I understood, as being a stay-at-home parent is hard work. I suggested we explore some hobbies for her, or that she could go back to work part-time if she wanted. The thing is, I'm not someone who jumps to conclusions or gets paranoid easily. I've always been pretty straightforward about problems, and I figured if something was really wrong, we would discuss it like adults. However, Sarah kept giving me vague answers about needing space to think and figure out what she wanted from life. I suggested marriage counseling, but she said maybe later. She just needed time to sort through her feelings first. Then, about 4 months ago, Sarah came to me and said she needed a break from our marriage, not a divorce. Just a break to find herself and figure out what she wanted. She expressed feeling suffocated and needed time to remember who she was before becoming a wife and mother. She wanted to move back in with her parents for a few weeks, maybe a month, and take Marcus with her to maintain some distance while still being a mom. I wasn't thrilled about this idea, because breaks in marriage usually means someone's already checked out or there's someone else involved. But Sarah insisted it was just about her needing space, not about me or our marriage specifically. She said she still loved me, but felt lost and needed time away from our routine to clear her head. I told her I thought it was a bad idea and that we should work on things together, but she was adamant that this break was necessary to save our marriage in the long run. So, I agreed to the break. Mostly because I didn't want to be the controlling husband who wouldn't let his wife have space. When she was clearly struggling with something, Sarah packed up her and Marcus's things and moved back to her parents' house. We agreed that she'd bring Marcus back for weekends with me, and that we would check in with each other every few days. The plan was supposed to be temporary, maybe 4 to 6 weeks at most. The first week felt weird. The house seemed empty, and I missed having Marcus around for his normal bedtime routine and weekend activities. Sarah would text me updates about how Marcus was doing and send pictures, which was nice, but our phone conversations were awkward and surface level. She would ask about work, and I would ask about her parents and Marcus, but we weren't really discussing us, the break, or what she was figuring out about herself. By the second week, I noticed that Sarah was posting more on social media, which was strange since she had never been a big Facebook or Instagram person. She was sharing pictures of herself at coffee shops, hiking trails, and local events, always with captions about exploring and discovering new things. Some of the pictures were clearly taken by someone else because she was in them, but she never mentioned hanging out with friends or who was taking the photos. When I asked her about it during one of our calls, she explained that she just wanted to get out more and meet new people, maybe make some friends, since being home with Marcus all the time had left her feeling isolated. But by the third week, Marcus started asking when his dad was coming home, and if Mummy and Daddy were getting divorced like his friends' parents. I told him that Mummy just needed some time to visit Grandma and Grandpa, and that we'd all be together again soon. But I was starting to wonder if that was true. Sarah kept extending the break, first saying she needed another week, then 2 more weeks, and maybe through the end of the month. Every time I pushed for a specific timeline or asked what exactly she was figuring out, she'd get defensive and say I was pressuring her and not respecting her need for space. That's when I decided to do some digging. Sarah's explanations were too vague, and her behavior was too different from the woman I had been married to for 8 years. I'm pretty good with computers because of my job. So I checked our phone records and saw she was texting and calling one number way more than usual, sometimes for hours at a time and often late at night. The number had a different area code, not from around here or where her parents lived. I reverse searched the number and found it belonged to someone named Kevin, who lived in Portland, Oregon. I found his Facebook profile and saw he was 26, unemployed, and according to his posts, living with his mother while working on his music career and building his streaming following. His profile was full of complaints about how hard life was and how nobody understood his artistic vision. Plus, a lot of angry posts about women and relationships. That made me think he wasn't exactly a catch. But here's the kicker. Sarah had been liking and commenting on his posts, going back about 7 months, way before she asked for the break. Their interaction started innocently enough, with her commenting on his music posts and him replying with thanks. But then I could see it escalated to more personal conversations in the comments before they obviously moved to private messaging and phone calls. I felt sick realizing my wife's need to find herself was actually about finding some loser in Oregon who spent his days playing video games and complaining about life while his mum paid his bills. But I didn't confront Sarah right away because I needed to think about my next moves, especially regarding Marcus and what this meant for our marriage and custody arrangements. I started taking screenshots of everything I could find, their public interactions on social media, Sarah's posts about exploring new connections and opening her heart to new experiences, and Kevin's posts about finally finding someone who understands him. That lined up perfectly with when Sarah asked for her break. I also printed out our phone record showing the hundreds of texts and hours of calls between them. While I was gathering evidence, Sarah called to tell me she wanted to extend the break indefinitely and was thinking about making some big changes in her life. She said she'd been doing a lot of soul-searching and realized she might be happier in a different environment, maybe somewhere with more opportunities and a different pace of life. When I asked what that meant specifically, she said she was considering moving somewhere new, maybe the West Coast, where she could start fresh and build the life she really wanted. That's when it clicked. Sarah wasn't just having an emotional affair with Kevin, she was planning to move to Oregon to be with him and take Marcus with her. I asked her directly if she was planning to move and take our son away from me, and she said she hadn't made any final decisions, but needed to consider all her options for building a better future for herself and Marcus. I told her that moving Marcus across the country wasn't an option we had agreed to when she asked for a break, and she said the break had helped her realize that staying in Ohio wasn't what was best for her or Marcus in the long run. She said Marcus would benefit from new experiences and a different environment, and that I could visit or maybe even consider moving too if I wanted to be part of their new life. That conversation ended with me telling Sarah we needed to talk in person about these plans, because moving our son across the country was a major decision that affected all of us. Not just her journey of self-discovery. She agreed to meet me the next day, halfway between our house and her parents' place. The next day, I met Sarah and brought printouts of everything I'd found. The phone records, screenshots of her social media interactions with Kevin, and his public posts about their relationship. I put the papers on the table and told her I knew about Kevin and that her break wasn't about finding herself. It was about having an affair with some guy in Oregon who couldn't even support himself. Sarah's face went completely red as she rushed to explain that it wasn't what I thought, that Kevin was just a friend who understood what she was going through, and their connection was emotional, not physical. I told her that didn't matter because she'd been lying to me for months and was planning to take our son across the country to be with her affair partner without even discussing it with me first. She said she hadn't been planning anything definite and was just exploring her options. But then she started talking about how unhappy she'd been in our marriage and how Kevin made her feel alive and understood in ways I never had. She said Kevin supported her dreams and encouraged her to think bigger about her life, while I just wanted her to stay in the same boring routine forever. I told her that was fine. She could pursue whatever dreams she wanted with Kevin, but she wasn't taking Marcus to Oregon to play house with some unemployed guy she met online. Sarah said I was being controlling, and that she had just as much right to determine what was best for Marcus as I did. She claimed Kevin was actually great with kids, and had been helping her think through how to give Marcus better opportunities than he'd have in Ohio. That's when I told Sarah I'd already consulted with a divorce attorney and would be filing papers by the end of the week. I said if she wanted to move to Oregon to be with Kevin, that was her choice. But Marcus was staying in Ohio with me, where he had stability, his school, his friends, and a parent who wasn't chasing online relationships with strangers. Sarah completely lost it and started yelling about how I was trying to control her and keep her from being happy, claiming I was using Marcus as a weapon against her. She said she'd been miserable for years and finally found someone who made her feel valued and supported. And now I was trying to destroy that, because I couldn't handle her finding happiness outside our marriage. I told her I wasn't trying to destroy anything. She'd already done that by lying, cheating, and planning to uproot our son's life for some guy she'd never even met in person. She admitted they hadn't met face to face yet, but said that didn't make their connection any less real or meaningful. We went back and forth with her insisting that moving to Oregon would be good for Marcus and give him new opportunities, while I pointed out that she wanted to move across the country for a guy who was unemployed and lived with his mother, which didn't exactly scream stability or better opportunities for our son. The conversation ended with Sarah saying she wasn't going to let me bully her into staying in a marriage and life that made her miserable, and I told her she was free to leave, but Marcus wasn't going anywhere. She gathered up the papers I brought and said she needed time to think about everything, which I thought was ironic since she'd been doing nothing but thinking for the past for months while lying to me about what she was actually thinking. That afternoon, I went straight to my attorney's office and filed for divorce, citing adultery and requesting primary custody of Marcus, based on Sarah's plan to relocate him across the country for reasons unrelated to his best interests. My attorney said the evidence I'd gathered would be helpful, especially the documentation of Sarah's affair and her stated intention to move Marcus away from his established life in Ohio. I also called Sarah's parents that evening to let them know what was happening. They were shocked because Sarah had told them she just needed space to figure things out and hadn't mentioned anything about Kevin or moving to Oregon. Her dad was pretty upset that Sarah had been lying to them, too, and using their house as a base while she planned to move across the country. Her mom was more focused on Marcus and worried about how all this would affect him. The next day, Sarah called me screaming about how I blindsided her by filing for divorce and talking to her parents. She said she thought we were going to work things out and that filing papers was a nuclear option that would destroy any chance of saving our marriage. I told her that ship had sailed when she started her affair and began planning to move our son across the country. Without discussing it with me, she said she hadn't made any final decisions about moving and was just exploring possibilities. But I pointed out that she'd already been talking to Kevin about Marcus and how he'd fit into their life together in Oregon. She couldn't deny that because I had screenshots of Kevin posting about looking forward to meeting the little man and talking about how he was ready to step up and be the father figure Marcus needed. Over the next few weeks, things moved quickly. Hired her own attorney and argued that she deserved primary custody since she'd been Marcus's main caregiver for the past 2 years as a stay-at-home mum. However, her attorney struggled to overcome the fact that Sarah was planning to move Marcus away from his school friends and extended family to live with a man she had met online, who had no job or stable housing situation. The court ordered a temporary custody arrangement where Marcus would stay with me during the week and visit Sarah on weekends, but only in Ohio. Sarah was not allowed to take Marcus out of state without court permission, which effectively ended her plans to move to Oregon, at least for the time being. Sarah was furious about the custody restrictions and kept arguing that I was using the legal system to control her and prevent her from building a new life. She claimed that Kevin was supportive and understanding about the situation, and was even considering moving to Ohio to be closer to her. I found this hilarious because he couldn't even afford his own apartment in Oregon, where the cost of living was significantly lower than in most parts of Ohio. Throughout this process, I had to explain to Marcus why Mummy and Daddy weren't living together anymore, and why he couldn't visit Grandma and Grandpa as much. I kept it simple and age-appropriate, telling him that sometimes grown-ups have disagreements about important things and need to live separately while they figure things out. Marcus took it pretty well, probably better than Sarah and I did. He seemed relieved to be back in his own room and to have a normal routine. About 6 weeks after I filed for divorce, Sarah came to pick Marcus up for her weekend visit and told me she had been doing a lot of thinking about our marriage and whether we could work things out. She said her relationship with Kevin had helped her realize what was missing in our marriage. But maybe we could rebuild our connection if we both put in the effort. I told her I wasn't interested in rebuilding anything with someone who had lied to me for months and tried to move our son across the country for an affair partner. She insisted that the situation with Kevin wasn't really an affair since they had never been physical, and that she had ended their relationship. When she realized it was complicating her ability to co-parent effectively with me, I asked if she had ended it because she realized it was wrong or because the custody restrictions made it impossible for her to move to Oregon. She couldn't give me a straight answer, and instead, she kept talking around the question, saying her priorities had shifted now that she understood how serious the legal situation was. That's when I knew Sarah hadn't actually ended things with Kevin because she realized she made a mistake. She had just put their relationship on hold because I made it legally impossible for her to follow through on her original plan. She seemed to be trying to reconcile with me as a backup option while likely still communicating with Kevin and figuring out a new way to make their relationship work. I told Sarah I wasn't interested in being her plan B while she figured out how to make her affair work within the constraints of our custody arrangement. She accused me of being unfair and not giving her credit for trying to fix our marriage, but I pointed out that she had only become interested in fixing things after her plan to move away with Marcus was blocked by the court. The divorce process took a few more months to finalize. Sarah's attorney tried several different approaches to get her more custody time or permission to relocate with Marcus. But none of them worked because she couldn't demonstrate that moving to Oregon would benefit Marcus in any concrete way. The fact that she wanted to move to be with an unemployed man she had met online didn't help her case. In the end, I was granted primary physical custody of Marcus, with Sarah getting him every other weekend and alternating holidays. She also had to pay a small amount of child support since I was covering most of Marcus's expenses, and she was expected to find a job. Now that she wasn't a stay-home mum anymore, the court also ordered that neither of us could relocate more than 100 miles from our current location without permission and a custody modification hearing. Sarah moved into a small apartment about 20 minutes from our house and found a job at another dental office. She seems to have accepted that her Oregon plans aren't happening, at least not anytime soon, but I suspect she is still in contact with Kevin in some capacity. Her social media activity suggests she is still interested in exploring new connections and staying open to opportunities, which sounds a lot like the same language she was using when she was planning to move across the country. Marcus has adjusted well to the new arrangement and seems happy to have a consistent routine again. He doesn't ask about the divorce much anymore and has settled into his new life. I've accepted that Mummy and Daddy live in different houses now, but both love Marcus very much. Sarah is a decent mother when she focuses on being a mum instead of chasing online relationships. I'm glad Marcus still gets to spend time with her regularly. The whole situation has taught me that when someone asks for a break to find themselves, they often have already found someone else and are just trying to figure out how to transition to that new relationship without completely blowing up their current life. I'm not bitter about Sarah choosing to end our marriage. If she was that unhappy, it's better for everyone that we're not together. However, I am angry that she tried to use Marcus as a bargaining chip in her affair and was willing to uproot his entire life so she could chase a fantasy with a guy who couldn't even support himself. let alone help support a child. Now, I'm focused on being the best single dad I can be, and ensuring Marcus has stability and consistency in his life. Sarah can pursue whatever relationships make her happy, but she's not going to disrupt Marcus's life or use him to facilitate her romantic adventures. I filed for divorce while Sarah was planning to take Marcus across the country, even though she claims she was just exploring her options and hadn't made any final decisions. Update. A lot of people have asked for updates, so here's what's been happening since my original post. Sarah has been following the custody arrangement, and things have been relatively smooth for the past couple of months. Marcus is doing well in school, and seems to have fully adjusted to the new routine. Sarah picks him up on Friday evenings and brings him back on Sunday nights, and they usually do normal kid activities like going to parks, movies, or visiting her parents. However, last week something happened that confirmed my suspicions about her still being in contact with Kevin. Marcus came home from a weekend with Sarah and mentioned that Mummy's friend Kevin had been on video calls with them. When I asked Marcus about it, he said Kevin had talked to him a few times and asked him questions about school and what he liked to do for fun. I immediately called Sarah and asked her about Kevin talking to our son during her custody time. Tried to downplay it, saying Kevin was just being friendly and that it wasn't a big deal since they were just video chatting. I told her I didn't want some stranger from Oregon talking to Marcus, especially not the guy she'd been having an affair with. Sarah got defensive, claiming Kevin wasn't a stranger anymore since they'd been talking for almost a year, and that he was genuinely interested in being part of her life, which included getting to know Marcus. She said Kevin had been asking about Marcus for months and thought it would be nice for them to meet, even if just over video chat. I told Sarah that Kevin meeting Marcus wasn't her decision to make unilaterally, especially since our custody order specified that neither of us could introduce Marcus to romantic partners without discussing it first. She argued that Kevin wasn't technically a romantic partner since they'd never met in person, and that their relationship was complicated by the distance and legal situation. That's when I realized Sarah was still planning to make things work with Kevin somehow, even though she couldn't move to Oregon anymore. She'd probably been telling Kevin about the custody restrictions, and they were trying to figure out alternative ways to build their relationship, including getting Kevin involved with Marcus to see how they'd all get along. I told Sarah that any future contact between Kevin and Marcus needed to stop immediately, and that if I found out she was still facilitating conversations between them, I'd go back to court to modify the custody arrangement. She said I was being controlling and trying to dictate who she could talk to and who Marcus could meet. But I pointed out that protecting Marcus from my ex-wife's affair partner wasn't being controlling. It was being a responsible parent. Sarah agreed to stop the video calls but insisted I was overreacting and that Kevin was actually a positive influence who could potentially be good for Marcus if their relationship developed further. I told her that wasn't going to happen, and that she needed to accept that her affair with Kevin wasn't going to turn into some blended family situation involving our son. The conversation ended with Sarah saying she understood my concerns, but thought I was being unfair to Kevin, who had been nothing but supportive and kind throughout this whole situation. I've been keeping closer tabs on Marcus's weekends with Sarah and asking him about his time there. I've been keeping a close eye on the situation with Sarah and our custody arrangement. So far, it seems that the video calls with Kevin have stopped, but I don't trust Sarah to maintain those boundaries in the long run. About a month ago, Sarah started discussing modifying our custody arrangement to give her more time with Marcus during the summer. She mentioned wanting to take him on a longer vacation and possibly visit places they had never been together. However, when I asked for specifics, she was vague about where they would go and how long they would be away. Then, 2 weeks ago, Marcus returned from a weekend visit and mentioned that Mummy had been talking about taking a big trip to see mountains and that they might visit someone who had been wanting to meet him for a long time. When I pressed Marcus for more details, he said Sarah had shown him pictures of mountains and a big house, and that the person they might visit was Mummy's special friend who lives far away. I immediately suspected that Sarah was planning to take Marcus to Oregon to meet Kevin. despite our custody agreement that prohibits her from taking him out of state without court permission that night. I called Sarah and confronted her about it. She admitted she'd been considering taking Marcus to Oregon for a week during his summer break, so he could see a different part of the country and meet Kevin in person. I told Sarah that this was not going to happen and reminded her of the custody restrictions. She argued that she thought those restrictions were just temporary while we were getting divorced, and that now that everything was finalized, she should be able to travel with Marcus during her custody time. I explained that the travel restrictions were part of our permanent custody order, not just temporary divorce proceedings. Sarah got frustrated and said she felt like I was keeping Marcus trapped in Ohio and preventing him from having new experiences. She mentioned that Kevin had been looking forward to meeting Marcus for months, and had even planned activities they could do together, including hiking and visiting some kind of music studio where Kevin apparently does his recording. I told Sarah that I didn't care what Kevin had been planning because he was not going to meet Marcus. At that point, she claimed I was being unreasonable and insisted that Marcus deserved to know the people who were important in her life, especially someone who might become a permanent part of their future. That's when Sarah admitted that she and Kevin had been talking about him moving to Ohio instead of her moving to Oregon. She said Kevin was willing to relocate to be closer to her and Marcus, and that they had been discussing him finding work in our area so they could build a life together there. I asked Sarah if she genuinely thought Kevin moving from Oregon to Ohio was going to happen, considering he couldn't even find work in his own city and was living with his mother. She insisted that Kevin was motivated to make changes in his life now that he had something real to work toward, and that having Sarah and Marcus in his life would give him the stability and purpose he needed to become more successful. This entire conversation made me realize that Sarah hadn't given up on her relationship with Kevin at all. They had just changed their strategy from her moving to Oregon to him moving to Ohio. I was certain she was still planning to introduce them during the summer trip, but now it would be framed as Kevin checking out Ohio as a potential place to relocate rather than Sarah and Marcus visiting him in Oregon. I firmly told Sarah that Kevin was not moving to Ohio and that Marcus was not meeting him, whether it happened here, in Oregon, or anywhere else. She argued that I couldn't control who she dated or who she introduced Marcus to forever, and that eventually, Kevin would be a part of their lives whether I liked it or not. I ended the conversation by stating that if she took Marcus out of state without court permission, I would have her arrested for custodial interference and seek to have her custody rights terminated. She accused me of threatening her and being vindictive, but I maintained that I was protecting our son from her continued poor judgment regarding this affair. The next day, I called my attorney to discuss Sarah's plans to take Marcus to Oregon and her ongoing relationship with Kevin. He advised that we could file for a custody modification to make the travel restrictions even more explicit and possibly reduce Sarah's custody time if she continued trying to violate the existing order. We filed a motion asking the court to clarify that Sarah couldn't take Marcus out of state under any circumstances without written court approval, and requested that she'll be held in contempt if she continued planning unauthorized travel with him. We also asked for additional safeguards to prevent future violations. In response, Sarah's attorney argued that the original custody order was too restrictive, and that Sarah should be allowed to travel with Marcus during her custody time, as long as she provided reasonable notice. They claimed that preventing Sarah from taking Marcus on vacations was harmful to their relationship and Marcus's development. The hearing took place last week, where Sarah had to testify under oath about her relationship with Kevin and her plans to take Marcus to Oregon. She admitted that she had been in regular contact with Kevin throughout the entire divorce process and that they had been planning for him to meet Marcus for months. She also acknowledged that Kevin's moving to Ohio was a possibility they seriously discussed. That the judge wasn't impressed with Sarah's honesty or judgment. He pointed out that she had been deceptive about ending her relationship with Kevin and had been planning to violate the custody order by taking Marcus out of state without permission. He also noted that introducing Marcus to her affair partner was not in Marcus's best interests and demonstrated poor parental judgment. As a result, the judge modified the custody order to clearly state that Sarah cannot take Marcus outside of Ohio without prior written court approval, and any violations would lead to an immediate suspension of her custody rights. Furthermore, he ordered that Sarah cannot introduce Marcus to any romantic partners without first notifying me and the court, and that any such introductions must be gradual and in Marcus's best interests. Sarah was furious about the new restrictions, and claimed that the judge was treating her like a criminal instead of a mother trying to build a new life outside the courthouse. She insisted that this wasn't over, and that she would find a way to build a relationship between Kevin and Marcus that wouldn't violate the court order. I told Sarah she needed to accept that Kevin wouldn't be part of Marcus's life, and that continuing to pursue this would likely result in her losing more custody time. In response, she asserted that Kevin wasn't going anywhere, and that I'd have to get used to the idea of him being a permanent part of her life. Since the hearing, Sarah has been adhering to the modified custody order, but I can tell she isn't happy about it. Marcus hasn't mentioned any more video calls with Kevin, but I suspect Sarah is just being more careful about hiding their contact instead of actually ending it. I'm prepared to keep fighting this in court if necessary, because I refuse to let Sarah use Marcus to facilitate her relationship with someone she met online. Marcus deserves stability and consistency, not to be dragged into his mother's romantic drama with a stranger from across the country. So that's where things stand now. Sarah is still seeing Marcus every other weekend, but under much stricter guidelines regarding travel and introducing him to new people. I believe she is still planning to find a way to make things work with Kevin. But at least now, I have better legal protection to prevent her from involving Marcus in that relationship.